Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. I wanted to start talking a little bit about curves in Maya. Curves are a NURBS object. NURBS themselves don't really seem to be used too often these days, but NURBS curves, however, are used for a variety of different purposes, including modeling, as well as using them for, say, motion paths or other such things using a curve. So before I start working on videos for the curves menu, you can see there's lots of things in here for editing curves. I thought first we need to talk about how to create curves. So curves, we can be created from the create menu, and here we have curve tools. I can break this off. And we're going to have videos going over each of these, I think. But essentially these are all different tools you can use to create curves, and they all work in different ways. Probably the most common tools to use are the CV curve tool or the EP curve tool. Let's go over in this video the CV curve tool. Now, if you're not familiar with NURBS, I do have a video going over the components of NURBS. Similar to polygons, they have components. Polygons have vertices, edges, and faces, while NURBS have CVs or control vertices, isoparms, and hulls. If you click the little exclamation point in the corner of this video, it'll give you the option to see that video going over NURBS components. So the CV curve tool, CV meaning control vertex. First, let's go into the tool settings. I'm just going to nest this into the UI by dragging this over here. And I'll move this over to the side. Well, we can close this actually. I'll close that. Here are our CV curve tool settings. I can click the reset tool button to get the default settings for the tool. So with the tool active, I have this crosshair for my cursor. Like any kind of drawing function in Maya, you typically will need to use an orthographic grid to draw on. So for example, the side view, front view, top view, those are orthographic views. They're not 3D. If you do draw a curve in the perspective view, which is a 3D view, like I have here, just understand that it's going to draw on the grid, which is like the floor plane of the scene. It's not going to draw, vertically in the scene. It's going to draw along this grid on the floor. So just with the default settings, I'm just going to start clicking. So I clicked once. You can see I have the first point show. If I click again, I kind of intuitively, as you would expect, you have a line kind of gets drawn between the 2 points you've clicked. Now you can click and drag, and you can fine tune where you want your points to be placed. Let me place that third point there. If you do decide that you don't like where that point is, while the tool is active, I'm still drawing the curve. I haven't finished or finalized the curve yet. If you minimize, click and drag, you can then reposition that last set point along the curve you're creating. If you click the delete key, while the curve is being drawn, it will delete the most recently placed point, and then you can reposition it however you'd like. So one thing to note about what I've done so far is I've placed 3 points. Now I want you to take a look at the settings here before I place a 4th point. Right now our curve degree is set to 3, or cubic, right here. And I've placed 3 points. Now what's going to happen when I place the 4th point is the curve itself will actually start to be rendered. Right now, this line we're drawing is not the actual curve. This is essentially what we're drawing here is the hull of the curve. These are points between control vertices, points between CVs. So once I click this 4th point, there that white line appears, and that is the actual curve. Now you notice that the points I've been placing is not where the curve actually travels through. These points are outside of the curve, aside from the first and last points. Those first and last points are on the curve at the end points of the curve, but all points in between are kind of outside the curve and are influencing it. If you're familiar with the NURBS components, again, that video I linked to earlier, this is the way a hull looks for a NURBS surface. The hull is the line between CVs, or control vertices. So by using the CV curve tool, we're actually placing the control vertices of the curve, and the curve itself is being influenced by their positions, but is not actually drawing through their positions, okay? For example, this point here at the end of this curve, where it is right now, the curve and the point intersect at the end. But once I place another point, the curve actually pulls away from that point, just like these other points, and will intersect at the last point, like this. So it pulls away from that point once you add another CV to the curve. This is a cubic curve, and the cubic refers to the, again, the curve degree, or the curvature of the curve, and how it's being created based on the CV placement. And once you have a curve that you like, hit the Enter key, and it'll actually finish drawing the curve. It'll turn green like this. You can see my tool is now not active. I had to move the select tool active right now, and I have the curve selected and drawn in my scene. Another thing to keep aware of is, like all NURBS objects, the 1, 2, and 3 keys will actually change how the curve is rendered in your viewport. This is 1, 2, 3, and with 3 being the most smooth render of the curve, 1 being the least smooth render, and 2 being in between. So press the 3 key if you want to see the smoothest rendering of the curve itself. Sometimes it's a little bit blocky. Okay, that's essentially the basics on how you draw a curve with the CV curve tool. Let's go ahead and do that again. I'm just going to click and go a little faster this time, and you can see how as I place these CV points, the curve responds and becomes created. And I hit enter, and the curve is actually finished being created. So while the curve is being drawn, while the tool is active, the curve itself is not complete yet until you hit enter. Now after you hit enter, if you hit delete now, obviously it deletes the whole curve, not just the last point. And if you undo, it'll undo the entire curve. Okay, so if you want to undo just placing that last position, that last point on the curve, you have to do it while the curve is being drawn before you hit enter. I'll go ahead and delete this one. All right, so let's reset this and look at our curve CV curve tool settings now. So like we talked about previously, the curve degree is kind of the smoothness of the curve, or how the curve is, how many points are required before the curve actually renders, and it uses all those points to calculate the curve's shape. 3 is the default value, and that's cubic, and it's right here in kind of in the middle. You do have 3 cubic, and then you also have 3 Bezier. If I choose this option and then I start drawing points, you can see it's a little bit different. Again, it's using a different kind of math to draw the curve. Again, hit enter. You can see that being done. So let's use cubic, and I'm just going to grid snap here to here, whoops, to here, and then down to here, and then press 3 and hit enter. So this is the curve drawn with the cubic curve degree. Let's go with the Bezier curve degree and see what the difference is. Press X to grid snap. So you see the Bezier is not very different at all. It's just a different way of drawing the curve. You notice that the way the curve is drawn is a little bit different. Let's go back and do that again. If I click here, you see again from the origin point, this line kind of shoots out. If I click over here and then to here, again, this line does not continue. And as I click through again, you can see the curve getting drawn. It's just a different math behind the curve creation. I typically don't use Bezier too much. Pretty much just stick with cubic. It seems to work just fine. Let's go ahead and continue with a curve degree of 2 and see what the different results are. I'll grid snap again to these places. Now with a 2 curve degree, you'll notice only 3 clicks were necessary before the curve is drawn. With cubic, it was 4. And as I click down here, like with all the other curves, hit enter, you can see the difference with that curve, how it was drawn. It's pulled closer to the, actually goes all the way to the end of the grid here. And let's go back to, let's try linear. Linear is unique. It's curve degree of 1, meaning that all the points, the curve between points will actually be straight. There will be no curvature. So grid snap these points together. You'll see with the second click, the white curve is immediately rendered. You don't need a second or third click. And then I hit enter. And you can see that curve does not have any curvature to it. It's simply a straight lines between points. Let me hide the grid for now. So this is a linear curve. This is the curve degree of 2. This is a cubic or curve degree of 3 curve. And we can keep going. Might as well, since we're here. Let's look at a curve degree of 5. I'll grid snap here. And for 5, a curve degree of 5, I would actually need 6 points. So I'm going to actually point snap here to here. So that's 3 points. 4, 5, 6. Press 3 to smooth it. Hit enter. So you see how the curve took longer to draw. You had to draw 6 points, 6 clicks, 6 CVs before the curve was actually rendered, and you can see the difference that curve shape is. And then lastly, we have a curve degree of 7. Now, I've never used this particular curve degree for any reason, but you would need 8 clicks, 8 CVs before the curve actually renders. So 6, 6, 7, and 8. So I'm just going to say, let's go ahead and just grid snap 4 clicks on each side, just so we have 8. And I'm just going to try to use the same grid lines all the way down. There we go. With the 8th CV place, and again press 3 to smooth it, you can see this is a curve degree of 7 curve. So all the curves are slightly different shapes, but the most drastic differences, let's move these over here, are between linear, which is 1, 2, and 3. So those are actually linear and the cubic are probably the most used curve degrees chosen. Those are the ones I use the most. I use linear if I need straight lines, and then cubic if I need a curve or a smooth line. So far, I haven't really had any specific need to choose one of these other curve degrees other than linear or cubic, and cubic being the default. Alrighty, so I went through all the curve degrees and kind of how they're made. Again, based on the number the curve degree is, you actually need 1 additional click before the curve is created. So with a linear curve degree, you need 2 points. With a curve degree of 2, you need 3 points. Curve degree of 3, you need 4 points, and so on. All right, let's go ahead and delete these curves that we have. And let's look at our knot spacing. So knot spacing, we have uniform and chord length. All right, so the difference between the knot spacing, this one's a little bit more subtle. And the difference between a uniform knot spacing versus a chord length knot spacing is very subtle difference. There's actually no difference in the actual curve shape itself, okay? This is more to do with the math behind the curve. So just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to keep it cubic, and let's do knot spacing of uniform, which is the default option, which is what we've been doing. So hold down X again to grid snap, so I can have my curves be identical when I choose the different options. I'm just going to do the same thing we've been doing. Again, press 3 for the smoothest curve. So this is our curve that we've been creating, a uniform knot spacing, cubic, okay? I'm actually going to name it. Let's go ahead and just name this uniform, just so we don't forget. So now let's choose the chord length knot spacing. Hold an X for grid snap. I'll do the same grid points. Press 3, hit enter. So our curve is identical. You can see it fits right on top of each other. So there's no difference in the actual curve shape. Before I forget, let me rename this one chord for chord length. So what's the difference? Well, let's go into the attributes. Control A to open the attribute editor of the curves. All right. So the main difference you can see here, besides the name, is the min-max value, or this is also known as the parameterization. The min-max value from 0 to 20 for the chord length curve, and from 0 to 1 for the uniform curve. So what's the difference between that? Now, the usage of the parameterization of the curves is varied. I mean, it really depends on what you're going to use the curve for. Textures, for example, will display better on a surface that was created with curves using chord length, knot spacing, as opposed to uniform knot spacing. That's just how the texture kind of displays on it. The uniform knot spacing, the pro of doing that is that it's much more predictable what your parameterization is. It's 0 to 1. This one says 0 to 20. And for example, if I were to create another chord length curve, and I'm going to grid snap, but snap to different points. So I'm going to snap over here, go all the way up here to here, and then back down to here. Hit enter. And now this one is 0 to 20.055 as opposed to 0 to 20. Again, this is 0 to 1. If I were to use uniform again and click those same grid points, hit enter, 0 to 1 again. So it's predictable. It will be 0 to 1. This one's 0 to 1. I click that one. You can see this one's 0 to 20.055 as opposed to 0 to 20. So the chord length knot spacing is less predictable, but is better quality if you're modeling shapes with these curves using, for example, loft or planar or something like that. But if you're not modeling with the curve and you're just using it for, an animation path or some other usage like that, uniform knot spacing might be better. Okay, so, and there's more to it than that, but that's kind of the basic kind of feeling about knot spacing. So that's knot spacing, uniform, or chord length in a nutshell. I mean, like I said, there's more to it than just what I've talked about. One thing to note about when I say that textures will display better on surfaces created with chord length curves, that is referring to NURBS surfaces, okay? If you're creating polygon surfaces, the chord length or uniform or not will have no real impact on how textures are displayed on the surface. So let me make sure to make that clear. NURBS surfaces created with chord length curves will display textures better than curves that were uniform. NURBS surfaces only. Polygons will display textures fine either way. So the reason why I say that is because I personally tend to always work with polygons. I don't really work with NURBS surfaces very often at all. And so I tend to use uniform and cubic all the time. I just tend to use the default values unless I need a linear curve, which I would change it. So unless you're working with NURBS, I would say stick with uniform, it's fine. It's also, like I said, more predictable. And then last but not least, we have our multiple end knots checkbox, on or off. So this one's a bit easier just to show. I'm going to keep multiple end knots turned on, which is a default setting. So I'm just going to create a quick curve like we have been doing, hit enter. So this curve was created with multiple end knots turned on. So let me uncheck multiple end knots. So what it's referring to is the end knots, the knots or the points at the end of the curves. So again, I'm going to use those same grid points. I'm going to grid snap between these points, just like we were doing, and then hit enter, and you can see the difference. The curve is right here. And this is with multiple end knots turned off. I can right click on it and choose Control Vertex to look at the components. So you still see the CV way down here, but it's as if the curve is invisible between where this CV and the end point registers or has influence. This curve, if I right click and choose Control Vertex, I have these CVs here at the four corners of this grid section. Select this curve. Again, the same places for the CVs. However, the curve itself renders much differently. So why would you want to do this? Obviously, having the end knots visible makes the ends of the curve a bit easier to manipulate. With having them not visible or having no multiple end knots, like with this curve, you do have a bit more flexibility when it comes to attaching this curve to other curves. You do have a bit more control over the tangency of curves that are attached to it. So it's kind of, to be honest, I don't really do this very often, attaching curves and manipulating curves in that way. So multiple end knots, the default setting, it tends to be a setting you typically want turned on. You can turn them off, however, to get this kind of control over a curve's shape. Again, you have these points way down here that are influencing the curve, but don't have a curve actually drawn all the way to that point. And if you have any thoughts on, again, reasons why you might want to do this, feel free to leave them in the comments. The main understanding that I have is that having this this kind of control gives you more flexibility when editing these curves and attaching them together and so on. That's just my understanding. I could be mistaken about that. But in any case, let's go back to the options here. This is the CV curve tool options for using the CV curve tool for creating curves. Hit enter when you're done, and there you have a curve. Anyway, I hope that you like this video. We're going to go over a lot more curve focused tools in the future. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comments. I definitely read all of your comments and appreciate each one. If you have any other thoughts, or if you just simply hit the like button, I definitely appreciate all your contributions to the Maya Toolbelt. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you later.